The US Senate is set to vote on a measure that would block $20 billion worth of arms sales to Israel. Introduced by Bernie Sanders, the vote on the joint resolutions of disapproval will be the first Senate vote of its kind. This was Sanders speaking ahead of the vote.
Clearly, what is happening in Gaza today is unspeakable. But what makes it even more painful is that much of what is happening there has been done with U.S. weapons and with American taxpayer support. In the last year alone, the U.S. has provided $18 billion in military aid to Israel and delivered more than 50,000 tons of military equipment. In other words, and this is the most important point to be made, the United States of America is complicit in these atrocities. That complicity must end, and that is what these resolutions are about. It is time to tell the Netanyahu government that they cannot use U.S. taxpayer dollars and American weapons in violation of U.S. and international law and in violation of our moral values.
If passed, the resolutions would block the sale of up to 50 new F-15 fighter jets, high-explosive mortar rounds, tank rounds, and armoured vehicles. But while Sanders has some high-profile supporters in the Senate, including Elizabeth Warren, it's not clear how much support the resolutions will get from the rest of the Democratic bloc in the Senate. The Democrats currently enjoy a slim majority of 2 in the Senate. The Republicans are almost certain to try to quash it, with incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune saying this.
To our allies in Israel and to the Jewish people around the world, my message to you is this: reinforcements are on the way. Senate Republicans reclaim the majority in 6 weeks, and when we do, we will make clear that the United States Congress stands squarely in Israel's corner, and we will help the Trump-Vance administration defend Israel and promote peace in the region.
That's funny, isn't it? And lots of the sort of definitions of anti-Semitism, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was dodgy in many ways. One of the things it says is anti-Semitic is to conflate Jewish people with the state of Israel. Now, I agree that is anti-Semitic, but then you've got the Republican Senate or incoming Senate Majority Leader saying that I'm reassuring not just the Israelis, but every Jew in the world, the world's Jewish people, that we are going to give Israel unlimited arms to continue their genocide against the Palestinian people. Now, one of the ironies of this bill is that the US government is already in breach of a promise it made to cut arms transfers to Israel. Back in October, the Biden administration gave Israel 30 days to increase humanitarian aid into Gaza or face cuts to military support. Israel ignored that deadline, which passed last week, and yet Israel arms sales are still continuing. Ahead of that vote, protesters against the arms trade with Israel also occupied the Senate building in support of Sanders' bill, carrying banners reading "Fund Jobs, Not Israel" and "Arms Embargo Now." Most protesters amassed in the building's atrium, while others threw pamphlets from higher floors. But they were swiftly greeted with police aggression, with almost 100 people arrested. The protesters came from a broad coalition of groups and included Palestinians, Jews, climate activists, veterans, and indigenous people. In a statement, Sandra Tamari, executive director of the Adalah Justice Project, said this: "Every day we keep sending weapons to Israel is a day dozens of Palestinian children and families are horrifically murdered using our tax dollars. This week, senators will clearly go on the record with their stance on genocide in the first vote in US history to directly block weapons to Israel." And there's also a quote from Jewish Voice for Peace member Eliana Fishman. "American Jews are sick and tired of the US government using Jewish safety as a justification for funding the slaughter of Palestinians and Lebanese men, women, and children." The Senate vote on the resolutions will come just hours after the US once again vetoed a Security Council resolution calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza at the United Nations. All the other 14 members of the Security Council, including the UK, voted in favour of it. So previously we've often sort of abstained on votes such as that. Now we are voting in favour of unconditional ceasefires. Of course, though, it doesn't mean that much if the United States are still vetoing. Dahlia, I very much doubt this bill will pass. This is not the sort of agenda that US senators tend to sign up to. Is it still meaningful to have sort of Bernie Sanders putting this forward?
It is. I mean, first of all, there's no moral or ethical or legal basis on which the US should not pass this resolution, on which the US should continue to supply arms to Israel. Genocides are rarely ruled genocides until quite a long time after they are completed. But in terms of the information that we have, the markers of a genocide, we have the ICJ ruling, we have concerns from the UN, we have enough information to know that there is a plausible risk of genocide taking place. All of the markers for that at this point have been cleared. And so the US continuing to supply arms is them continuing to supply arms to a state that there is reasonable there are reasonable grounds to believe is committing genocide, and that is illegal under international law. So there is no actual basis other than very short-term political reasons for why the US would continue to arm Israel and would not vote through this resolution. Unfortunately, not only do we have a situation whereby this resolution is unlikely to pass, but the particular fact that the US issued an ultimatum about, over a month ago to say you have 30 days to allow in humanitarian aid, otherwise you risk a reduction in military support. And we have, 8 international humanitarian aid agencies have come out and said that Israel have not cleared the benchmarks of that ultimatum. And yet, not only is the US not going to implement the ultimatum, but they're actually going to be in this peculiar and very kind of just sinister position where they're not only going to not withdraw military support, but they're actually likely going to pass a resolution that doubles down on that military support. And so it is important, I think, for Bernie Sanders to introduce this bill, because I think it's important to raise these things to the surface. I think it's way too late. The minute that the ICJ came through with that ruling that there is plausible risk that Israel is committing genocide, according to international law, it would have been entirely reasonable to demand at a Senate level that the US should withdraw arms support for a state that is at plausible risk of committing genocide. But the reason that we aren't seeing these shifts, and I think it's important for Bernie Sanders to force that contradiction to the fore, to force people to actually make a statement so that we don't just listen to these annoying aphorisms about we're working behind, working tirelessly behind the scenes for a ceasefire. Actually, when you're put to it, you need to put your name on record, and the historical record, that over a year since this genocide began, you are still signing away billions of dollars of worth of weapons to the state of Israel. But, the reason that this resolution is not likely to pass is because particularly when it comes to international policy, the US is not a democracy, and it is not a force for peace and justice, unless by peace you mean the total annihilation and silencing and ethnic cleansing of particular groups of people to the point where there aren't even enough people left to mount a resistance to their oppression. And part of this is because of, powerful lobbying interests, Christians United for Israel, AIPAC, etc. But much more broadly than that, much more of a broader reason as to why, particularly when it comes to this issue, the US is not a democracy and it's not a force for peace and justice, is because it shares the geopolitical goals of Israel, which is for the Arab world, Middle East and North Africa, to be colonized for its resources, to be colonized for its labor force, to be colonized for the strategic, geographic position that it occupies in the world. And so, in a sense, whilst there might be discrepancies between some US administrations and Israel on the details of it, but the broad brush strokes is an exchange of full loyalty because of a shared geopolitical interest in colonizing the region. And until the US can find a different vehicle through which to colonize the region, they are going to continue to be loyal to Israel, even if it is actually in violation of international international law, which the US is signed up to.